Welcome to The Memory Game, a podcast where I, Nathan Tuffin,
and I, Rob Beer, exchange voice notes as we carry out the important work of recording an emotional history of video games
for the betterment of future generations. This week, Rob asks a soul-searching question about what cheating in video games has taught us.
Hey Kasparov, well done for beating death in our previous episode and surviving for another week. I thought I'd just message you to hit you up with the next question. So, chaining on from the last week's question about the games that you'd stake your life on, I was reflecting on the fact that I instantly went, one of my options was basically trying to cheat by using a dodgy setup that would have given me an advantage. And in any other format, if it wasn't a game with death, I would feel awful about that. I'm very Puritan about competition and have those old values of things not being cricket. That I'd rather lose playing properly than win by cheating. And that's probably come to me from playing sport and my mum's values around that. But also I wonder how much it was formed by playing games as a kid and the lessons that cheats taught me in games and how it can hollow out the joy of a victory. And so that's my question for this week. What were the cheats in games that you remember most, and what lessons did they teach you? I will write that as a snappier question in the eventual show notes, I imagine. But I've come up with the three that I think cover the lessons that I've come up with three answers. My first isn't a cheat code in a game, but it is absolutely cheating. And with all of my answers, this was entirely single player, so this was just me playing against the computer, but still garnering some lessons from that, rather than just the straightforward social lessons of people hating me for cheating. So the first one that I thought of was, as I say, it wasn't a cheat code, it was NHL 95, which I played on the PC. I'm imagining it was probably closer to 98 by the time I was playing it. Would have bought like an old cheapy version rather than trying to play the latest game. And was also one that booted from DOS, which taught me some fundamentals about how to operate computers in a way that I wouldn't have learnt without NHL 95, which is a massive distraction from the thing that involved cheating on it. So what I learned was, playing against the computer, if you were losing, you could pause the game, go to the thing where you could select sides and change to be the computer team for a minute, unpause the game, repause the game, so that it sort of registered that you'd done that. And then with ice hockey, there's a thing where if you're losing late in the game, players pull their goalkeeper, so they send their goalkeeper to the bench so they have one extra person on the team. It's the equivalent of like sending your goalkeeper up for corners in football, but it's really commonplace. It happens in most games, and inevitably the other team gets the puck and scores. But 1 in 10 times, or probably less than that, it's a heroic move that pulls off. But playing against a computer, I would just switch to their team, make them pull their goalie, switch back to my... give the other team the puck, which was my original team, and then score. And I would do that sometimes to be sort of 7 or 8-0 up. If I was losing in the first period, I would just stack some goals and then play on from there. And it took me a while to, realise that there wasn't fun there. But it definitely, did the ritual of winning, but without the buzz feeling that you get from actually doing a hard thing well. And so it was an early lesson in games. The classic lesson of cheating that it kills the buzz, harshes the buzz, man. The second game that I was thinking about with cheats was we're on to actual cheat code territory here. So playing Quake, which was the first first person shooter that I played. I don't know that I would have played it before GoldenEye, but it's the one that I played, that I owned myself, the one that I played most. And Quake had a thing where you could press the console button and type messages into it, and it was intended for the multiplayer game. But in single player, you could just type in some cheats, and the classic one was if you just typed in the word God, it made you invincible. That was God mode. That you can just... I remember doing that and, just sprinting through levels that I'd otherwise not been able to do. Because I'd sort of hit a wall with it, probably. Like, I'd mastered the first few levels, but then I just wasn't, it wasn't good enough. Not helped by the fact that I didn't think that using a rollerball mouse was the way to play first-person shooters, because my rollerball mouse was sort of a bit gammy and not that responsive. And so I really turned against the idea that using a mouse was the way to do it, and instead perfected the technique of using the keyboard to control it entirely, which involved, to look up and down, I needed to use the page up and page down keys. So I would have got absolutely destroyed on multiplayer, but I was able to fumble my way through single player quite successfully doing that. But I played the game a bunch before I discovered that, because I must have found the cheats for that on a games website. That wasn't off the back of a magazine, because I would have been playing it anachronistically, so like 4 or 5 years after it came out, or at least a couple of years after it came out. So it wouldn't have been at the back of magazines, the sort of cheat codes, but I must have searched on some early website, cheat code website. I wonder if I will remember what that is, and we can put that in, or if you can remember what what cheat code websites you used back in the day. And what the most visceral memory of using that cheat mode was, and this was something else I found out about online. Quake had a thing where, to choose the difficulty setting, you started the game. It wasn't like a menu where you chose the difficulty setting. It was, you were in a room and there were 3 holes in front of you. There was like a sort of left, a middle and a right. And the one on the left was easy, the one in the middle was medium, and the one on the right was hard. And I think it had a thing where, to get to hard mode, you had to jump over like a lava pit. And maybe medium, you had to jump over some water or something. There was something visual to tell you how difficult the game was going to be. And there was also a nightmare mode, which I think what you had to do was, as you went to drop into one of the modes, maybe easy mode, probably hard mode, you had to drop into the hole and then hold back on your keyboard, and it meant that you dropped down the hole and then back onto a little ledge, and then you could walk along the ledge and round the corner, and there was like a specific sort of nightmare mode, and that was surrounded by grim-looking torches. And that would have been absolutely impossible for me to survive on, but it had like 3 times the number of baddies in it or whatever. And there were also additional cheats there of like all the weapons and stuff, which I would have enjoyed. Just infinite ammo and just running around. But the thing is, what it does, and this is the lesson that you learn from it, is that it sort of devalues things, more of which in a second. But the challenge, like what it taught me is that challenge is a large part of computer games, and that if you remove the challenge, then a lot of the fun drains away at the same time. So don't ruin your challenges. I think that's maybe the same lesson as my first lesson. And then the third one, which will be a similar lesson to the previous one that I learned, was, and this is a classic, is The Sims, the code that gives you money. And I hope not to be corrected on this, because I've spouted off on about this before, but the cheat for The Sims was that you typed in the word Rosebud, and then I think it was either one or exclamation mark, and then a semicolon, and you typed in one semicolon, one semicolon, one semicolon, one semicolon, and you could copy and paste that, and then press enter, and then you'd have to redo it. And for each of the one semicolon instances, it gave you 1,000 sim bucks, or whatever the currency was. And so it's a way you could sit there and do that for a couple of minutes, and then you'd have basically infinite wealth to do what you wished with. And what I've spouted on before about this is, years later I watched the film Citizen Kane, which is has a central like the last thing he says before he dies is Rosebud, and the whole film then spans out trying to sort of explain and like who this person is, and they're a sort of ostentatiously rich person. And it turns out at the very end that, this is a spoiler for people who haven't seen Citizen Kane, that Rosebud is a reference to, it's written on a sledge that he had as a little kid. And like that's the last moment that he was truly happy, before any of the wealth and fortune that he eventually got. And it's a sort of parable about, how money and power distract us from the things in life that are valuable. And he sort of builds this crazy ostentatious house that has sort of famed weird gardens and architecture, and he's just a man isolated in his castle, and you can't buy the things that matter. You can't buy love. And that's what I assume that was some sort of reference to that cheat code, when they put that cheat code in of like, yeah, this will give you infinite money, but you don't want it because it will not give you what you want. And then obviously what you use and what you end up using that money for is the same thing that everyone uses money for in The Sims, which is building a big elaborate house for your sim that's so that they don't work, and therefore they're not particularly happy. They sort of spend their days not really sure what to do with themselves, usually partying until they're too tired to go to the bed and wetting themselves in the middle of the floor. Then you invite all the neighbours over, get them into the big swimming pool that you've built, and then you delete the stairs and see who survives the longest. And I mean, there is surely a lesson in there about the what absolute power will do. It will turn you into a absolute psychopath. So yeah, those are my three cheats. What are the cheats that taught you most is my question. And specific as well. Do you remember what any of the, like the Rosebud one, do you remember what any of the actual cheat codes were for those? Could you, given a controller, type them in, do you think? Hit me back. Hit me back.
Hello, Charles Foster Kane Beer. Oh, you've done a clever thing here, haven't you? You've asked what on the surface appears to be a nice, do you remember this thing from your gaming past type question, but then sprinkled on a layer that makes us gaze into the very fabric of our souls. I think I was about 30 seconds in to considering my answers when I was forced to confront an unpleasant element of my character, which I would rather keep buried down nice and deep, thank you. So first off, I want to commend you on your pure intent with all things, as well as video games, and acknowledge that I think I probably share your desire to do things the right way, or at least I do when I first sit down to play a game. And then the extent to which I hold myself to those standards are liable to slip depending on how frustrated I get. And I think that's kind of my key takeaway with my answers here. I think it's also interesting to delve down just a little bit into what the intentions of cheat codes are and what they're actually for, because there are so many different functions for cheats in games, and sometimes even the term cheat is subjective depending on your experience. I think my first ever memory of a cheat code is the very famous up, down, left, right, A start on the menu of Sonic the Hedgehog for the Mega Drive. And I think all that did was bring up a list of all the individual levels within the game, so you could just select them and bypass having to play through each level to get to the next one. And that can obviously be used as a cheat, but it also does sort of help make up for the fact that you can't save your progress in that game, and that for most people they're rarely going to be sitting down to do a full playthrough. And like for me as a child, that cheat represented the ability to play levels I would never have had the skill to reach on my own. So it sort of gave me access to the full spectrum of content available in the game without, having to grow up, become an adult in order to be good enough to play it. And similarly, I remember a cheat, I think I found it in a magazine once many years ago for, I want to say it's Mortal Kombat 3 or 4, and what it allowed you to do was turn on one-button fatalities, so you didn't have to do the whole sort of elaborate string of commands that were necessary to perform, a violent sort of murder at the end of a fight that you'd won. So in that case, it was almost like a sort of quality of life upgrade, because it was really difficult to get the right combination of buttons into that game. And as a sort of side note, there was also a cheat that just showed you every single fatality and brutality in the game on this sort of lengthy looping demo screen. And I remember being really excited to try it, but then I think I felt how I imagine a child does when their parents have caught them trying to smoke a cigarette, and then they make them smoke the whole pack. Like even for the sort of bloodthirsty teen that I was, I think I was a bit like, oh my, this is far too much gratuitous violence. And it sort of brought on a kind of queasiness, like a feeling that I never wanted to see a fatality ever again, or in fact play Mortal Kombat. Anyway, I've sneakily crowbarred those two bonus examples in because I think there are probably lots of ways of cheating that don't teach us much or have much impact. But I sort of tried to take your lead with my examples and try to answer your questions as truthfully as possible and focus on how the cheat or act of cheating made me feel. So, my first example is from a game I mentioned in the last episode, which I hope is allowed, and that's Counter-Strike. And in this example, I've done this type of cheating on pretty much every version of that game. It's been pretty consistent. And this is also my only example that has a direct knock-on to real opponents, i.e. another player was beaten in the game and ultimately got a lower score because I cheated. And in a world where kill-death ratios amount to self-worth, that's serious business. I've got something to be ashamed of there. So basically, when I would play Counter-Strike with my friends, we were often sat all in the same room, right, with our computers next to each other, or at least on a private voice channel. And we'll all jump on a server, all join the same team, and then you're playing together. That's, the fun way to play. But the way we would cheat is that once one of you dies, most public servers used to have a ghost mode. So you then sort of float around the map as a roving camera, and you can pass in and out of walls, and you just watch the remaining action unfold. And it makes it, so it's still a bit interesting after you've been killed. You're not just sat there looking at a blank screen. But of course, when you're on a private chat channel together, that means that once you've died, you can give your friends valuable intel about the location of other players, enemies. And in games like Counter-Strike, that's everything. That gives you a huge, huge advantage. And when I sort of really think about it and examine this type of cheating, I feel like we justified it at the time because it felt really low level. And I probably wouldn't have even described it as cheating right up until now, even though it objectively is cheating and very much surpasses the intention of the game. And I think that's probably because, well, there's a few reasons, but one is because online first-person shooters, on PC anyway, are rife with people using actual cheat mods in order to beat other people. And those people are the very worst of humanity. And they can ruin games, ruin full online games by using these cheats. And they use, cheats like ones that you can use to see through walls, or be invincible or invisible, or get an instant headshot on people as soon as they're in your crosshairs. And the funny thing is, obviously, that always makes me livid. And I always ask, why would they do this? What on earth are they getting out of playing this game with no challenge at all? Just, 100 kills, no deaths, and just being a sort of god in the game. And, going back to your point on kind of control and being a sociopath and power, there's probably something there about that. But, it always feels like, what are you bothering for? But really, what me and my friends were doing is certainly something that sits within the same ballpark, maybe just less effectively. And I also think there's something about cheating, but within the bounds of the game, as we were. So not actually putting in a cheat code or downloading a cheat that made it feel more acceptable. And the fact that my skill level often meant that the extra intel didn't result in me getting any more kills or winning the game. So it was an advantage, but it wasn't a sure thing. But, having said all that, I do now see that it was wrong, and I apologise to all of those people I shot through a wall when there was no possible way that I could have known that they were there without the assistance of a friend ghosting around the map. And on more recent versions of that game, there are like competitive modes where your screen goes dark once you die, or you can only spectate your own teammates. But even that can actually be used to do an even lower level of cheating. Like you might die, but then you can inform your friends where you were killed and where the opponent was at the time that happened. And it just feels like that's never not going to happen if you're playing with your mates. It just feels like that it sort of becomes a part of the game. And I think, having watched a few kind of proper tournaments of professional players, they're all sat in a room together. There's no way they're not sharing that intel. Intel sharing must be a key part of the game. So maybe that you wouldn't consider cheating. But sometimes also, say you're spectating your friend after you've died, the second set of eyes sometimes comes in handy. Sometimes you see something they don't and you can assist them in that way. Anyway, that's my first one. That's probably the most heinous. And the next one falls more under the category of you're only hurting yourself. So the second example is the grand strategy game Crusader Kings 2, which puts you in control of sort of individual characters within a historical dynasty from the Middle Ages. I don't think we've ever talked about this game. I'm pretty sure you've not played it, but it's really fun. It takes up a lot of time. It's a big time sink, but really well-made, interesting game. And you basically you pull strings and you have to exert control over your lords and your land, and have taxes and make policy changes, and sort of think really strategically in order to expand your territory and build a legacy. And your characters can die and you take on the role of your son or your next heir, or daughter, and then you carry on like that. You can sort of do things like you start as a small duke in Ireland, and then you might use armies and mercenaries and strategic marriages and things like that to become king or queen of the whole island. And then, you might move on to Britain or France and start taking over territory there. But the way the game actually works is, it's kind of a strategic map screen with lots of different options, and the game can be paused at any point or moved at whatever speed you want. But often the outcome of your decisions isn't necessarily clear for a long time, so you put things in place and then you don't know what's going to happen. But on the base game, obviously, like with so many games, especially PC games, you can load and save as often as you like if you aren't happy with your decisions. And that kind of leads me to my first counter question for you. As a purist, in games that allow you to load and save, is it still cheating if you use that mechanic to correct past decisions and mistakes and eventually go on to win the game? Have you still won the game if you've saved and loaded or loaded back across decisions many times? So anyway, in Crusader Kings and similar games, there is what you can put on an Iron Man mode, which removes your ability to save and load at will, and it puts in an auto-save point at various intervals. And I always play Iron Man when it's a choice, especially with games like Crusader Kings, because I like having to live with the consequences of my decisions and my mistakes. That makes it feel real. Like, that's what a real Crusader King would have to do. He can't load and save. He has to, die of dysentery or syphilis or whatever happens to him. So that's something I do. I choose that because I feel like that's me making the pure choice at the beginning of the game. However, what I always inevitably end up doing is making a mistake, realising just in time, and then hitting Alt and F4 to force shut the game just before an autosave can happen, so that I don't have to live by the consequences of my actions, and I'll do that time and time again until I get the right outcome. And this might be a tactic you're more familiar with. It's something people do in sports games. Like you frustratingly lose a game and then you whack the console button off just before the loss can be registered by the console and save, which is something I'm very ashamed to say I do all the time. And it's the thing I mentioned earlier that I would rather not acknowledge as a significant flaw in my character. So my final choice is the same one as yours. It's The Sims, because it's one of my most poignant memories of using actual cheat codes. But I think I have slightly different experiences of the outcomes. I think firstly I should say that I've played every version of The Sims, and many of the extortionately priced expansions. I've got hundreds of hours of playtime, and I'm largely a Sims purist, so I've played loads of characters and families that I've made wealthy and successful and have big houses without cheating, just playing through, doing good careers, doing other little things within the game to get money. And then, at the end of all that, like, the sort of payoff is buying all of the mad stuff that you can get in the game and making your Sims party all day and all night, like much like with your Rosebud Sims from the early game. But when I used Rosebud in the very first version of the game, it was almost always when my friend Harry came round to play. We'd sit, next to each other and play together. And we would do something like you'd make a couple of mad bachelor Sims and then build them a wacky house. And the fun of the game was the sort of imagined story we imprinted on the characters and the hijinks we made them get up to. And that was facilitated by having all this money in this mad house and all the fun stuff in the game. And, we could have sat there, I guess, for hours and hours and made them live regular lives and do the regular career trees in order to earn enough money to buy those things. But in reality, that would have just taken ages. And it wasn't what we were there for. Rosebud, in that instance, I don't think felt like cheating. It felt more like the Sonic the Hedgehog cheat did for me all those years before, in that it just allowed me to experience the game in a way that wasn't otherwise easily available. But I think it also raises questions about what we play games for, right? So, and, sometimes I find when I play The Sims now in my more purist way, I play it a bit like, like Perfect Hand Blackjack, where you just make the same decisions over and over again, or something like that, where I'm just doing the exact right things and fast forwarding through most of the day in order to just grind my Sims through a particular career tree. So it's like, oh, right, practice the guitar, fast forward. Oh, they're hungry, make them eat, make them go to the toilet, make them shower, go to bed, get up, practice the guitar, off to work. The whole thing's on full speed nearly the whole time. And the Sims, the Sims games do have set objectives, but if you're primarily playing it as a storytelling or role-playing experience, then really cheats that change the material world to assist the storytelling aren't really cheats. Or are they? Am I just justifying cheating for no reason? So that kind of adds a different spin to it, I think, in that sense. But interestingly, there was another cheat for the original Sims game, which I refused to use, which allowed you to pick up Sims like they were in-game objects and delete them, and then they would just reappear with all of their bars sort of fully green. And it also let you pick up rubbish and dirty plates and stuff like that and just delete them instead of having your Sims clean them up. And to me, that felt like the most heinous of cheats, especially if I was trying to do like a pure playthrough and get a family to succeed and be wealthy and be happy. Because, the grind of cleaning and sorting everything out, that's what it's all about. And, the irony of making a virtual character tidy up a room while I sat in a filthy university dorm surrounded by piles of laundry and dirty plates is something else I would rather not discuss. So final bit of business, you asked about where I got my cheat codes from. I think maybe the playground sometimes. Does that sound familiar to you? That, a friend would tell you a cheat and you'd write it down and take it home. That seemed to happen sometimes. But then, and then magazines as well. But then eventually the website I always used was called CheatCC, which I think stood for Cheat Code Central. And I just had a look at it. It does still exist, though now it seems to have evolved into a sort of Kotaku-style gaming news site. But yeah, let me know if you had any memories of where you would get cheat codes. That's all from me there. Excellent question. And this one's for Rob, by the way.
Hey there, Cheater. Thanks for your message. After listening to it, I am going to recant most of what I said in my initial answers. I think I was both pious and judgmental, and also just totally out of touch with my younger self. And that's partly what we're trying to do here, I think, is not trying to just list through the games of our youth, but try and get back in contact with the emotional experiences that we had playing them. And so, yeah, when you started talking about that Sonic cheat, and how really it was just about obtaining access to the game in a way that you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, as you say, you're probably sandwiching in a little 15-minute play before dinner. So it's okay that you were typing in the cheat and playing level 3 rather than playing level 1. And also we probably didn't have the skills that we needed to navigate through those levels. So me using God mode in Quake, it meant that I saw the whole game rather than just the first couple of levels that I would have been able to do otherwise. Linked to that as well is just the idea that it was fun. It was actually fun. I think I claimed that it hollowed out the experience for me, and I don't think it did. Upon reflection, I probably just loved being able to use all the guns and being in a sort of panic-free state, and just shooting the guns was fun. Every element of a game like that was fun. And now, as I'm older, I sort of view games through a slightly more, just through a totally experienced filter, where I'm comparing each game to other experiences I've had and other games and how they work, and being analytical about them in a way that obscures just the visceral joy of being absorbed in the thing, which is what I would have been doing at the time. And cheats were and cheat codes were an access to the boundaries of those games, and augmented them and changed them, and allowed you to just use them as a sandbox for whatever you wanted to do. And I'd sort of maybe forgotten that as I was doing my previous answers. If I play a game with my daughter now, just like take Minecraft for instance, I've dabbled around that with her, and I will be wanting to go and do a thing. We're like, let's set ourselves an objective and go and do a thing. But if she spots a good tree that she wants to climb, she'll just spend 10 minutes doing that. And or just trying to hit a pig with a stick, like things that are repetitive and predictable to you as an experienced player aren't when you were a kid. And that's the danger, I think, is sort of reading a game now and being able to anticipate where it's going, what it's going to ask you to do, and the structures of it. Like that is a valid way of playing, but it's not the only way of playing. Like, you can just disregard it entirely and just use it as a playground to experiment and try and break. And that's often where I had the most joy with cheat codes. As you say, that's what you're doing in The Sims. That's what we're playing games for, isn't it? Is to experiment and do things in the game that you weren't able to do in real life. And the Sims, like, that was the joy of it as a kid, like having a job, cleaning your house. Those weren't things you were actually doing in real life. And it's interesting. I'd be interested at some point to hear how your enjoyment of those games differs from the joy that you took in those early years. Because using that Rosebud cheat was often about, as you say, someone being round and being like, let's just get loads of money and make something big and weird, and do things that you wouldn't have been able to do because you only had an hour together. By the way, the currency is simoleons. I looked that up. But I did catch you saying the grind of cleaning is what it's all about. Maybe that's a window into where your joy comes from. Forcing other people to clean. Do you have a cleaner, by the way? I know that he does. So that's maybe a life lesson. The grind of cleaning is what life is about. That was a big thought that I had, was like, okay, yeah, actually, I don't think cheat codes are in any way about cheating. They're about, as you say, they were about access or about experimentation. And then you got into the bounds of talking about is ghosting cheating? in Counter-Strike and moving around the map and spying for your friends. And I fall down on the side that's within the bounds of the game. They gave you the tools to do that, and so I think that's all part of the rules. Even in like a competition, I think that would be okay if they've enabled that. And that's the sort of professional sports mentality, isn't it, of like trying to find a competitive edge. But beyond that, I think you were a bunch of friends and you're just trying to be involved in the game in some way. And it's actually quite hard to coordinate and communicate between you. Must have been a rush when you actually managed to be helpful as you sort of shouted commands at each other. I can imagine that was great fun. Another question that you had was around, reflection was about whether saving on Crusader Kings with your Iron Mountain mode, I forgot what the mode is called, whether that counts as cheating, or that falls into the grounds of you're only cheating yourself, I suppose. And I've been thinking about that with I've been playing Baldur's Gate, which is a big branching role-playing game, and the term that I hadn't heard before when people were talking about it was save scumming, which is essentially just saving really regularly, and then before you get into a fight or before you have to investigate something, so that you can just reload it. And the load times are quite quick on the PlayStation, so there's sort of no harm in it. But it does raise big questions about why I'm playing it. If I'm just reloading it over and over and again to get the right choices, I might as well be watching a video of someone else playing it. And I think what ends up happening is there's a sort of moral relativism that creeps in, that's around the stories that you can tell yourself about why you're quitting and reloading. And I suppose it's about the competing stories you have. Like if you're really attached to a character and you want to see a particular arc play out, and then you can go for it. Or if you've been carrying something around for half of the game to use in a special occasion, it doesn't work out. It is pretty galling for that to not work. And one of the joys of playing D&D in real life is that you have a collective reaction to those failures, but playing on your own is a different thing, I reckon. And I'm sure if you were sort of live streaming it, or if we were sat together, you would maybe lean into those things. But the first person you have to lie to is yourself in that situation, isn't it? I realised as well that there was a cheat that we hadn't talked about, which should have absolutely been one of my answers, which was the rare candy cheat in Pokemon Red and Blue. And it doesn't fit within the boundaries of cheat codes because you don't punch anything in, but there were a series of really elaborate steps that you had to carry out, and I liked it as there's some sort of parable here where it was like sort of going and talking to a dealer or something, where you just know it's grubby, you shouldn't be doing it, but you need that sweet rare candy. So rare candy in the game Pokemon allows you to level up your characters just by rather than having to grind through and battle the Pokemon over and over again, and them getting experience points. You can just give them a rare candy and they will go through the levels. And so it's like, a sort of fast forward button through the game in a way. But yeah, the steps, I had to re-look up the steps because I remembered the end steps, but I didn't realise that there was more to it. So you have to you have to put a rare candy as the 6th item on your item list. So like in your backpack, make sure it's the 6th down. Then you have to talk to a bold man on the path. And he asks you if you're in a hurry and you say no. Once you have chatted to them, you fly to Cinnabar Island, and that's sort of an island with a stretch of water around it. And then you have to get on a Pokemon and surf and go up and down the water until a Pokemon appears called Missingo, which looks like, the art for it looks like a sort of QR code. And if you kill it, then the game crashes. And the story around the playground was that if you killed it and it crashed, then it would corrupt your whole save file. It was like a sort of way of the what's it called? Developers from sort of laughing at you for having tried to cheat. But that's probably not true. Probably just turned off. But if instead you managed to run away, then if you looked at your items, you then had infinite rare candy. And I just loved that as thinking about that from the developer's side. I think there were a few things in there which meant that you could only do it later in the game. So if it was a code, I suppose you would have just been able to punch that in. But because you needed to be able to fly and you need to be able to surf, it meant that you were guaranteed that you were at least halfway through the game by that point. And so I wondered if they had put it in for that reason, that's why they wanted it to be something outside of just typing in a cheat code, because then the game would just be totally broken, I suppose. But yeah, I think that's, each step in that is very intentional, whereas a code is just sort of passive, isn't it? And there's a darkening of the heart, I suppose, as you're doing it, potentially. And that helps you prepare you for what you're going to end up with, which is what you've wished for. Essentially, you've taken all of the challenge out of the game by having that rare candy. And if the Mortal Kombat had done the same, you might have been more prepared for the fatalities thing. So seeing all of those fatalities just stacked, just the videos of them stacked one after the other, without having to go through the rigor of like fighting and entering them in, must have been scarring. I can totally imagine how queasy it made you, because it's too much, man. Watching it as an adult as well, I'm just like, the Mortal Kombat art as well. There's something sort of uncanny about it, where it's, half photography, half people, half photography, half illustration. And maybe if you'd had to talk to a bold man and then fly to an island, that might have prepared you for what was to come. So I suppose those are the lessons that we can take away. Be careful what you wish for. Don't walk too close to the water in case you create a glitch that destroys the universe. And the grind of cleaning is what it's all about. I had a conversation with my friend Matt following the episode about Chess with Death and the games that I would stake my life on, and I realised that I should have picked Draw Race, which me, him and my friend Tom, we all worked together for the NHS, and we played this iPhone game, and it was just absolutely fantastic. But also, I think, because it was my phone, I think by the end I'd sort of mastered it. What was great about it was that it was always pretty close. But yeah, I think towards the end days, I had the edge on a few of the tracks. And it was such a brilliant game, and it's not available anymore, which is killer. So we were playing Draw Race 2 specifically. And if you picture, the whole thing, picture a whole sort of top-down driving track, and you took turns to draw the path that your car would go. So you had to factor in the sort of driving lines that you would want them to go, because there was no braking. So it was all about sort of the drift and the turning angle. So you took turns to draw the line that your cars would go, and then you sort of huddled around the phone once it started, and in the top right, bottom right, top left, bottom left, there were boost buttons. So I think it might have been that you had like a sort of bar of boost available across the whole track. So what you'd want to do is use it at points where your car had slowed down quite a lot. So if you'd lost the speed through a bad corner or something, then you could then boost. But yeah, it was great because you couldn't see other people's lines until the race started. The moment the race started, you had a sense of how it might go, and then there was a bit of chaos where the cars would be colliding. The boosts would suddenly change how the whole race went down. But also, Death, bringing this back to cheating, hasn't got what's it called? He hasn't got skin. He's just got bone, so he'd be useless at touchscreens.
Memory complete. Uploading memory.
Thanks for listening to The Memory Game. If you would like to share a gaming memory with us, ask us a question or send us your thoughts, you can contact us at memorygamepod@gmail.com or on Instagram @memorygamepod.